120 warships. That is exactly how many Iranian vessels the United States Navy has successfully neutralized since the end of February. We are talking about 2 carrier strike groups, 8 Aegis destroyers, and over $40 billion of raw naval firepower deployed across Hay oceans. By any traditional military metric, this should be a total victory. And yet the Strait of Hormuz remains effectively closed. 95% of all commercial shipping has vanished. Right now, over 3,000 vessels, including 250 massive oil tankers, are sitting dead in the water because they have nowhere to go. The world economy is bleeding $40 billion every single week. This isn't a failure of courage or firepower, it's a failure of math. The most powerful navy in human history reached a point where they had to pick up the phone and call the Air Force for help. But they didn't ask for the F-35 or the latest stealth technology. They asked for a 50-year-old titanium relic, an airplane designed in the 1970s to kill Soviet tanks in the fields of Europe. A plane top Pentagon officials have been begging Congress to retire for decades, calling it obsolete, redundant, and completely unfit for modern warfare. That is, right up until the exact moment they realized it was the only thing in the entire world that could actually win this fight. Why did a $40 billion fleet need a vintage tank killer to save the global economy? Because the Warthog does one thing the Navy simply cannot. To understand how a Cold War relic solves a problem that a nuclear-powered carrier air wing can't touch, you first have to understand the geography of the trap. On paper, the Strait of Hormuz is 21 nautical miles wide. But in reality, the usable space, the actual shipping lane where nungy massive tankers have to pass, is only 6 nautical miles wide. Think about that. You have a 2-mile inbound lane, a 2-mile outbound lane, and a tiny 2-mile buffer in GISA. That is the entire playable space. Everything outside those lines is Iranian territorial water. Now, look at the adversary waiting inside that corridor. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps doesn't use destroyers. They operate a fleet of over 1,500 fast attack craft. These aren't warships. They are essentially fiberglass speedboats. They are small, they sit incredibly thup to the water, and they are blisteringly fast. The slow ones do 50 knots. The newest designs are pushing past 100. These are not the targets our radar systems were built to track. In fact, they move faster and more erratically than most pleasure boats you'd see in Miami. Each one costs less than a luxury SUV, yet carries enough firepower to mission kill a billion-dollar frigate. Their doctrine is simple: swarm. They launch 30 to 50 boats simultaneously from every direction, saturating the sensors and forcing a destroyer to choose which target to engage while knowing every interceptor it fires. Costs a trum times more than the boat it's hitting. This is where the Navy's elite jets hit a wall. An A-10 Super Hornet is a masterpiece of engineering, but it's designed for the open ocean. When it crosses that 6-mile shipping lane at 5 chem knots, every target on the surface stays in the pilot's field of view for less than 2 seconds. At that speed, trying to distinguish a military fast boat from a civilian fishing trawler among thousands of vessels is practically impossible. But then, there's the A-10. At low altitude, the Warthog cruises at around 5 chem knots. In the world of high-performance jets, that sounds like a limitation. In the Strait of Hormuz, it's a superpower. It gives the pilot 3 times longer to identify, confirm, and engage. The pilot isn't just staring at a sensor readout. They are looking out the canopy, visually identifying the rocket launchers bolted to the hull, and making the split-second decision that a computer can't. The Warthog doesn't just fly over the problem, it lives inside it. To understand why this aircraft is the ultimate solution, we have to look at what is actually happening under the skin. Most modern fighters are designed to fly first, and then weapons are fitted into the remaining space. With the A-10, it was the exact opposite. The military built a gun, and then they built a titanium-plated airframe just to carry it into battle. This is the GAU-8 Avenger. It is a 7-barrel Gatling cannon that is quite literally the size of a Volkswagen Beetle. When you see it outside the aircraft, the scale is staggering. The barrels alone are over 7 feet long. When this beast fires, it isn't just a sound, it is a physical force that vibrates the entire airframe. We are talking about a rate of fire of 3,900 rounds per minute. That is 65 armor-piercing shells, leaving the barrels every single second. Take a look at a single 30mm round compared to a human hand. It is an absolute monster. Now, consider that the A-10 carries 1,150 of these in a massive drum magazine. For reference, a standard engagement is just a 2-second burst, which puts about 130 rounds on target. In the Strait of Hormuz, this is where the math of warfare completely flips on its head. The Navy has been out there firing SM-6 interceptors. Those are incredible pieces of technology, but they cost $5.3 million per shot. Firing one of those at a $50,000 fiberglass speedboat is a losing equation. But a burst from the GAU-8? That costs roughly $10,000. You aren't just winning the tactical engagement, you're winning the economic war. we are looking at a 500 to 1 cost advantage. You can neutralize an entire swarm for the price of a single luxury car, while the Navy would have spent the equivalent of a small nation's GDP. And the lethality is absolute. These rounds aren't just lead. They are armor-piercing incendiary shells made with depleted uranium penetrators. When they hit a composite hull, they don't just punch a hole, they shred the entire structure. The physics are terrifying. Each 30mm penetrator leaves the barrel at over 3,000 feet per second. When it fires, the gun generates 10,000 pounds of recoil force. That is actually more backward force than one of the A-10's engines produces in forward thrust. The airplane physically decelerates when the pilot pulls the trigger. To manage this, the gun is mounted slightly off-center to the port side, so the firing barrel aligns perfectly with the aircraft's centerline, preventing the nose from yawing during a strafe. And to keep the pilot alive while they do this, the entire cockpit is encased in a 1,200-pound titanium bathtub. It is designed to shrug off 23mm armor-piercing rounds and keep the mission going. It is not a fair fight, and it was never meant to be. This is engineering at its most ruthless. Step inside the cockpit. This is where you realize the Warthog isn't just a plane. It is a precision tool. Look at the center stick controls. That red button on top is your weapon release for bombs and missiles, but the trigger for the GAU-8 is right there underneath your index finger. To wake up the beast, you first have to flip the gun safety switch to the arm position. This activates both the cannon and the precision attack control system. Now look up at your HUD, the head-up display. You'll see the velocity vector showing exactly where the aircraft is moving, and below it, the CCIP, the computer-calculated impact point. When you line up that reticle and pull the first stage of the trigger, the computer stabilizes the plane. Pull it all the way, and the world turns into a wall of fire. You'll feel that 45 kilonewtons of recoil shaking your teeth, but you aren't operating in a vacuum. What we are seeing in the Strait right now is a masterclass in layered tactical networking. At the lowest level, just 200 feet above the waves, you have Army Apache attack helicopters. They act as the scalpels, using their 30mm chain guns and Hellfire missiles to pick off individual boats that try to hide behind civilian tankers. Then, at 3,000 feet, you have the A-10s. They are the heavy hitters, scanning the corridor in racetrack patterns, using their Mavericks to hit targets 12 miles away, and their Gatling guns to erase anything that gets closer. And above everyone, the Navy's Aegis destroyers provide the high-altitude umbrella, using their advanced radar to watch for Mach 3 cruise missiles or ballistic threats that the jets can't see. It is a three-branch symphony of destruction that Iran never accounted for. Their swarm doctrine was built on the idea that they could drain the Navy's expensive missile tubes until the destroyers were empty and defenseless. They studied the history, they looked at the simulations, and they thought they had the math figured out. But they didn't account for a 50-year-old plane that can stay on station for 2.5 hours, absorbing hits that would vaporize a stealth fighter. Think about Captain Kim Campbell. In 2003, her A-10 took a direct hit over Baghdad that severed both her primary and backup hydraulic lines. In an F-35, that is an immediate ejection. But the Warthog has a secret: manual reversion. She pulled a lever, bypassed every electronic and hydraulic system in the jet, and flew the plane back to base using nothing but old-fashioned cranks and steel cables. She landed a plane that was more whole than metal, and she did it because this aircraft was engineered to refuse to die. That survivability is the reason the A-10 is the only tool that can fly low enough to look the enemy in the eye and still come home. When the stakes are this high, you don't want the most expensive tool in the shed. You want the one that won't break when the shooting starts. The reason this plane stays in the air when everything else fails comes down to the engineering of its wings. While modern fighters use swept wings to break the sound barrier, the A-10 uses a straight wing design. It is built for lift, not speed. This allows the pilot to maintain controlled flight during aggressive, low-speed maneuvers and execute tight turns that keep the aircraft within that narrow 6-mile shipping corridor at all times. Then look at the engines. The TF-34 turbofans are mounted high and far back on the fuselage. This specific placement protects them from sucking in foreign debris on rough runways and masks their heat signature from infrared sensors on the ground. Even the fuel system is a fortress. The tanks are compartmentalized and self-sealing to prevent catastrophic leaks from small arms fire. When fully loaded with external tanks, the Warthog carries enough fuel to fill 20 school buses. That isn't just a number. It is 2.5 hours of persistent overwatch. It is the ability to wait, scan, and strike exactly when the enemy emerges. It is the ultimate proof that the right tool isn't the most expensive one. It is the one built for the reality of the fight. Before we wrap this up, let's run through the startup sequence. Set your inverter to standby and flip the battery power on. Start the auxiliary power unit and wait for the gauge to hit 100%. Advance the left throttle to idle. Then the right. Once the engines are stable, shut down the APU, set your displays, and you are ready for takeoff. At the end of the day, we don't worship the machine, we worship the equation. And the equation says the A-10 is the only answer to a $40 billion problem. If you think the Warthog earned its seat at the table, drop Warthog in the comments, subscribe to channel, and we'll keep calculating what actually works on the battlefield.